Good morning, everyone. All right, so we're going to take a look at your math e-learning. We're going to kind of move on from where we were yesterday with dividing decimals. So we're going to do these four together, and then you're going to do some on your own for practice. So if you're on your iPad, you should have your iPad screen split so that you're watching me on one side and you're filling out your page on the other. All right, so first thing we want to talk about is reading a division problem. When you read number 1, that problem is read as 3 divided by 12/100ths. When you read a division problem, it's the very first number that's your dividend that's going to go on the inside of your problem, and the 12/100ths is called your divisor. The divisor is the number that you're dividing by. Now, there's an important rule about when you have a decimal in the divisor. You are never allowed to divide by a decimal. So you're probably wondering, how are we not going to divide by a decimal? Because there's a decimal right there. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to move that decimal 2 places to the right, so it's now sitting behind the 12. Since we just moved that decimal 2 places to the right, we have to do the same thing with the 3. Remember, with a whole number, the decimal is always sitting behind the number. What you are allowed to do is add 2 zeros. So now we can slide that decimal over, and from here, that decimal is going to go straight up in your answer. Now we're ready to start dividing. So I'm looking at 12 and 3. I know that 12 is bigger than 3, so 12 cannot go into 3. Now I'm looking at 12 and 30. I know 12 times 2 is 24. 12 times 3 is 36. That would be too much. So I'm going to try a 2, and then I'm going to subtract 30 minus 24. I'm going to have to borrow from that 3 and make it a 2. So now I've got 10 minus 4 is 6. And I'm going to drop down that last 0. Now I'm looking at 12 and 60. And I know 12 times 5 is 60. So let's take a careful look at our answer up here. We've got 25 with a decimal point behind it. That decimal doesn't really mean anything since that 25 is a whole number. So your final answer for number 1 would just be 25. If there are no digits behind that decimal, you do not need to include the decimal in your answer. All right, let's take a look at number 2. So this one is read 7 5/10 divided by 1 25/100ths. The first number is your dividend that goes on the inside. The second number is your divisor that goes on the outside. That's what you're dividing by. Now, remember that rule we just learned. You are never allowed to have a decimal in the divisor. So we're going to slide that decimal 2 places to the right. I am allowed to add a 0 behind the 5. Now I have to slide this decimal also 2 places to the right. So in my answer, the decimal is going to be sitting right up there. Now we're ready to go ahead and start dividing. So I'm asking myself, how many times can 125 go into 7? Well, it can't because it's bigger. Now I'm looking at 125 and 75. Since 75 is smaller, 125 cannot go into 75. 125 into 750, oh my goodness gracious, I have no idea. I'm just going to take a random guess. I'm going to say 5 times. So let's come over here and test out the number 5. So 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 plus 2 is 12. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 1 is 6. Not quite there yet. That one was not big enough, so let's try times 6. 6 times 5 is 30. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 plus 3 is 15. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Perfect. Okay, so make sure and put your 6 up there in your quotient. And now we know that 125 times 6 is 750. You're going to subtract. Now look at our answer again. See how you've got that decimal sitting behind the 6? That decimal doesn't really mean anything since there are no digits behind it. So number 2, your final answer is 6. All right, we've got 1 8/10 divided by 4 thousandths. 1 8/10 is your dividend. 4 thousandths is your divisor. Remember the rule that we've learned, you are never allowed to have a decimal in the divisor. If you're not allowed, we're going to slide that decimal 3 places to the right. If you move the decimal in the divisor 3 places to the right, you must move the decimal in the dividend 3 places to the right. So now I'm going to slide that around that 800, and from there it's going to go straight up. Now we're ready to start dividing. So I'm looking at the 4 and the 1. Well, 4 is bigger than 1, so 4 cannot go into 1. Now I'm looking at 4 and 18. Well, I know 4 times 5 is 20. That's too much. 4 times 4 is 16. 8 minus 6 is 2, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So I'm going to bring down that next 0. 4 times 5 is 20. 20 minus 20 is 0. Now you have to be really careful when you get to this spot. See how you've got this 0 with nothing above it, and you've got this empty spot sitting here? You are never allowed to leave that blank. You still have this last 0 that we're going to drop down. And 4 cannot go into 0. That empty space must be filled in with a 0 placeholder. Again, with this answer, since there are no digits behind that decimal, your answer is just 450. You can drop that decimal off. You only include the decimal in your answer, in your quotient, if you have a digit behind it. All right, last one that we're going to do together. So this one is read 7 and 89 hundredths divided by 2. 7 and 89 hundredths is your dividend. 2 is your divisor. Now this one looks a little different. The first 3 we had a decimal in the divisor, but this one we don't. So if you look at this 2, there is no decimal. You are not going to move anything. All right, so if we're not going to move anything, watch what happens here. This decimal is going to go straight up from where it was to start with. So 2 times 3 is 6. 7 minus 6 is 1. Now we're going to drop down our 8. 2 times 9 is 18. 18 minus 18 is 0. Drop down your 9. 2 times 4 is 8. Nine minus 8 is 1. Now, look very carefully at what we have. We've got a remainder. You are not allowed to have a remainder. So I want everybody looking up here. Watch what I'm going to do. If you have a remainder when you're dividing a decimal, you have to add a 0, drop it down, and keep dividing. Now I know 2 times 5 is 10. 10 minus 10 is 0. Now once we have a 0 remainder, we are allowed to stop dividing. So this answer would be quotient. This quotient would be 3 and 945 thousandths. So make sure on your page that you leave all of the math that you did. You should be showing all of your work out to the side for your multiplying, etc., when you're trying to figure out what numbers to use. Now what you're going to do is scroll on to page 2. You have 4 division problems right here that you're going to solve just as we did the first ones. You can go back to that video as often as you need to look at those problems again and check your rules. And then you're going to end with 1 adding and 1 subtracting. So you should have a folder full of notes on adding and subtracting decimals, and you should have several pages on dividing and including the video. If you have any questions, make sure and email your teacher, and we will see you tomorrow.